Good evening and welcome. Tonight I have some spooky and allegedly true ghost stories for you. I'll leave the screen black as usual for atmosphere. So let's just get into it. I hope you're getting comfortable and will enjoy. Nestled in the foothills of southern Oregon's Rogue Valley is the tiny gold mining town of Jacksonville. It isn't far away from my home in the semi-rural outskirts of Medford, the valley's largest city. Walking down Jacksonville's main street is like being transported into the past. The city has made an effort to preserve its historic origins. In fact, it created quite a stir in the sleepy burg when members of a Hollywood film crew used it as a rustic western ambience in the making of a film. They had only to dump dirt on a paved street to transform the town into what it must have looked like 100 years ago. Adrienne Hall lived in Jacksonville. Her house was built in 1857. The modest one-level, three-bedroom structure sat at the end of a sloped lawn. Inside, the heavy wood floor of the living room was smooth from years of wear, and despite the cozy lived-in atmosphere there, whenever a draft rushed through the house, one suspected that the structure was not well insulated. Adrian's bedroom was a small, rectangular space in the back, just off the kitchen. There, sitting on her single bed, surrounded by her books and records and knickknacks, we spent hours discussing our teenage dilemmas. In a way, we were misfits. Our independent thinking and rebellious non-conforming attitudes kept us apart from the mainstream of school life. Our interests did not include football games and proms. We were concerned with much more esoteric matters, such as the mystery of the Ouija board. Motivated by a curiosity about the unknown, Adrian and I consulted Ouija on a variety of issues, including our past lives. In retrospect, I realize our quest with the board was a metaphor for the difficult, often painful process of developing an identity. We were searching for answers. Through the board, a spirit calling itself Osiris spoke to us in some details about the things he said were interesting. I had serious doubts about their validity. It wasn't until Timothy John Evans introduced himself to us on the board one day in the spring of 1972 that I began to take seriously this perplexing, amazing device. In prior sessions, our conversations with entities could easily have been explained as products of our unconscious minds, the tales they spun discounted as flights or fantasy. But the emergence of Tim Evans brought a relevance and immediacy to our sessions that had been missing until then. Tim claimed to be a ghost inhabiting Adrian's house. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, with the Ouija resting on our knees, Adrian and I worked the board with renewed concentration and excitement. Over a period of days, Tim's story was revealed. Timothy Evans was born on January 18, 1882, and died of a heart attack on April 3, 1940, at the age of 58. Tim's explanation for haunting the house were simple enough. As a youth, he had been playing in the area while workmen were constructing an addition to the building. A beam fell on him, crippling the lad for life. This single tragic event made such a psychic impression on Tim and caused him such enormous emotional pain throughout his life that he was drawn to the site of the accident after his death. The ghost maintained that he had inhabited the house since that time. He said that he had a crush on Adrian's divorced mother. In addition to looking after her, Tim played jokes on the objects of his affection by making the toilet run annoyingly. On occasions, he would draw attention to himself by producing a thump from the attic, and he was responsible for other assorted noises. But Tim's reason for contacting us through the board was not a frivolous one. He was trapped in the house by the memory of the horrible accident and lacked the energy to pass on to the next life. He wanted Adrian and me to assist him in this process by channeling to him the strength he needed to accomplish this goal. He wanted us to conduct a séance. Shaken by his request, Adrian and I were apprehensive about continuing. After some discussion, we realized we could determine whether or not Tim had told us the truth. He gave us his date of birth and cause of death. He claimed to be buried in the Jacksonville cemetery. There had to be records. We resolved to check out Tim's story. The Jacksonville Museum, a quaint colonial structure, was located near the center of town and held within its walls countless stories of that area's early inhabitants. A study of its records revealed that prior to 1900, many died of such cases as dropsy, gunshot wounds, wagon accidents, consumption, and the like. After some searching, we actually found Tim's name. Incredibly, the dates matched. According to the records, Tim died of coronary thrombosis and was indeed buried in the cemetery. We were exhilarated, and our next course of action was too tempting to avoid. We had to see his grave. Like the rest of the town, the Jacksonville cemetery was old. After passing under an iron gateway encrusted with age, we began our trek along the dirt pathways which led haphazardly through the unkept grounds. Many of the tombstones were in disrepair. These lonely, forgotten memorials to the dead were a sad and eerie sight. Adrian and I soon concluded our search was impossible. It would take hours to find Tim's grave. Dejected, we headed back down a road in the direction of the entrance. Suddenly, Adrian stopped. Almost as if she had been led, she walked directly to Tim's tombstone and pointed it out. Later, she told me that despite never having been in that section of the cemetery before, she intuitively knew where the grave was. We knelt down carefully and examined the tombstone. Whatever doubts we had about Tim's existence before were completely dispelled. Timothy John Evans had lived and died, and his spirit needed our help. It was night, and the house was empty, except for our 4 participants. Following Tim's request, we invited another couple to join us in the seance. None of us had ever participated in a seance before, or had any knowledge of how to conduct one, but Tim would guide our way. He requested it be held in the kitchen, where Adrian's mother spent much of her time, and that we sit boy girl around the kitchen table with a lit candle as the only source of illumination. We placed our hands on the table, lightly touching each other in traditional fashion. I was the voice of the group, affirming that we 4 were gathering our energies with love and directing them to Tim. While we sat in silence, concentrating on achieving our goal, I noticed a mirror on the opposite wall. I could see reflected in it the wall behind me, illuminated by the flickering candle. This pensive moment was shattered when I felt something touch my left arm. It wasn't my neighbor. I looked up at the mirror and to my astonishment saw a black shadow move slowly behind me from left to right. It completely blacked the mirror and passed on out of sight toward the living room. Suddenly, a loud crack sounded from that direction and traveled the entire length of the house through the wall. We sat frozen in our seats. The seance was over. Whether our efforts proved successful or not, I don't know. I do know we never saw Tim again. In later years, I have come to wonder if Tim was really a spirit or merely the product of our hidden psychic abilities. Being a romantic at heart, I choose to believe that Tim was who he said he was, and that we, despite our inexperience and naivete, were able to assist him. Now that we set the mood with some seance fun, let's continue on with our next one. It's called Grappling with a Ghost. From ghoulies to ghosties and 3-legged beasties and things that goes bump in the night, saints and angels preserve us, goes the old saying. Patrons of the Central Branch of Birmingham, Alabama's public library needs no preservation from its resident ghost, as long as they stay out of non-public areas. Built in 1927, the original library building is a beautiful stone neoclassical style structure on the southeastern corner of Lynn Park in downtown Birmingham. In the early 1980s, after the library moved most of its operations into the ultra-modern quarter across 21st Street, the building was completely renovated using the original plans. Modern conveniences blend well with traditional style. The building looks very much like it did when it was new. It now houses archives, government documents and interlibrary loan departments, along with administrative offices. The first floor contains the Southern History Department, one of the most extensive historical genealogical research centers in the South. In 1953, Fant Hill Thornley became the director of the Birmingham Public Library and held the position until 1970, when a heart attack ended his life, before the new library was even on the drawing board. A refined, scholarly gentleman, he was extremely fond of books and learning. He was also a great storyteller. Thornley passionately believed that a library could be much more than an educational institution. He is quoted as saying that, as a cultural and moral force, the library is unsurpassed. At the time of his death, the Birmingham Public Library was circulating more than 2.5 million books per year, one of the largest per capita circulation rates in the country. Thornley ran a tight ship and made it his business to be aware of everything that went on in the library. Apparently, he still does. Although smoking is banned in the library today, one could smoke in certain sections of the building during Thornley's directorship. Library staff members who remember him say they could always tell when he was coming by the smell of distinctive cigarette smoke. This odor was what alerted retired archivist Dr. Marvin Whiting to the presence of Thornley's spirit a few years ago. Whiting was working in the stacks after hours one evening. He knew that the security guard was the only other person in the building. "I heard the lift come up and the doors open and close," Whiting told the Birmingham News last year. "I heard the door to the room swing open, and I turned to see what the guard wanted. Nobody was there." Then Dr. Whiting noticed the familiar aroma of Thornley's cigarette. Deciding that it was only Fat Thornley checking in to see who was in the stacks that late night, Whiting returned to his work. Whiting said, "In a few minutes the door swung shut. I heard the lift doors open and closed and the lift go down." The door into the area where Whiting was working is made of heavy oak and opens onto an interior corridor, which rules out the possibility that a gust of wind could have caused it to open and close. When Whiting left the building later that evening, the guard confirmed that nobody else had been inside the library during that time. Whiting is not the only person who had a ghostly encounter with Thornley. One day last year, an employee who asked for her name not to be used was in the third-floor auditorium setting up refreshments for a meeting. To the left of the refreshments table is a doorway that leads to a modern, spacious kitchen. The only other way into the kitchen is a door to the storage area, which is kept locked at all times and to which only the security and maintenance department has keys. According to Jim Baggett, who succeeded Whiting as the library's archivist, she saw a man who looked like someone from the 1950s walk through that door from the kitchen. It frightened her so badly that she simply ran out of the room. She had been in and out of the kitchen for the past few minutes and had not left the auditorium, so there's no way anybody could have got in without being seen. Baggett showed the employee some photographs, including one of Thornley. She was pretty sure, but not completely certain, that Thornley was the man she saw. Library director Jack Bulov characterized the woman as very reliable and added, "If she says she saw something, I believe her." Another incident occurred in the same general area a few years after Whiting's sighting. An electrician who had been working in the stacks came rushing out, terrified, saying that a man who didn't look real had come up behind him. The electrician refused to return to work alone in that area again. When library officials showed him a group of photographs that included Thornley, he immediately pointed to Thornley's photograph and said, "That's him." The unfortunate fellow was so traumatized that his company had to send someone else out to finish the job. Bulow and Baggett say they now regret that nobody thought to get the man's name so that they could learn more about his experience. As much time as I have spent in the Birmingham Public Library through the years, I have not had a direct encounter with Thornley's spirit. So as part of my investigation, I called a parapsychologist and professional wrestler, Dr. Johnny Peebles III, to help make contact. Educated in California, Peebles had made a career of investigating ghosts, UFOs, and other paranormal phenomena. One stormy Tuesday evening in January, Peebles, his wrestling partner, the Great Kaiser, and I met Jim Baggett to see if we could contact Thornley's spirit. As we entered the third-floor auditorium, Peebles, who had not been briefed in details, immediately went to the location of the sighting near the kitchen. I won't reveal his methods, but we could tell that something was happening. Although we did not smell any cigarette smoke, we did feel the air growing cold. Peebles made contact with Thornley. He learned that the auditorium was where the spirit spent most of his time. Even though it was on the floor above where his office had been, he considered it his space. Thornley's spirit would return there when he needed to withdraw from patrolling the stacks or other areas of the building. People sensed that Thornley was indeed keeping an eye on his library, and seemed to be pleased by how it was run. People asked Thornley if he was ready to go to the light. He has not been summoned to the light, he reported. He will go when he is called. So far, Thornley's activity has centered on the old library building. However, there is a small but growing body of evidence that he or someone else perhaps may be watching over the newer building as well. His spirit has been spotted there by various people. Not long ago, a security guard was making his rounds before opening the main library building for the day, when he was astonished by a large, dense-looking black cloud on the third floor. The cloud did not move until the guard walked toward it for a closer look, at which time it simply evaporated. This cloud was not located near any vents or doorways. Anne Smith, a newcomer to Birmingham, did not know about the haunting until the day she was on the escalator going down from the third floor to the second. She sensed someone standing much too close to her, crowding her. Looking to her left, she observed a man's hand on the rail beside hers. When the escalator reached the bottom, she turned to give this man a piece of her mind for invading her space, only to discover she was completely alone. There's no way anyone could have run back up the escalator without being seen or heard. Carol Hall, a local Reiki master, reports that she smells cigarette smoke on other floors of the old library building and has now begun to sense a ghostly presence in the main building. Mrs. Hall says that the ghosts are attracted to people who can see them, which may explain the reason more people has not experienced Thornley's presence. Thornley is a benign ghost who truly does not intend to scare people, people said. He is simply trying to continue his work that was interrupted by his untimely heart attack. He feels his work is not yet completed. The theory among the library staff is that he is protective of his building. Unless he sees somebody he doesn't know in that area that is not open to the public, he will leave people alone. Jack Bulow says he sort of enjoys having a ghost around. He brings us good luck. Our next story is called A Haunted Chalet. In September 1971, my wife Helene, my children and I flew to Europe. We spent several days in London, then toured the English countryside for a few days before flying to Paris. Helene's uncle Ben, an American expatriate, met us in Paris and drove us to his home in La Chante, 60 kilometers to the south. Ben, his wife Madeleine and her niece Charlotte lived in a large, beautiful 15th century house. We had expected to only spend a short time with them before touring Europe, but as October approached the weather grew colder, which made the prospect of traveling less attractive. Also, our daughter Susie, 3 weeks before her 7th birthday, expressed a desire to attend the local school so she could make new friends and learn French. Charlotte owned an enormous 3-story chalet on adjoining property. One morning Madeleine asked us if we would like to rent it for the token sum of $50 a month. The 18th century chalet, built by Napoleon III for one of his mistresses, was surrounded by a 12-foot high stone wall that enclosed an acre of land. We were to rent the ground floor, consisting of 5 large rooms and a kitchen. There was no electricity, but the kitchen had running water. There was a flush toilet in a small room that had been added to the west side of the house. As Ben showed Helene the rooms on the first floor, I checked out the upstairs. An outside stairway led to the second floor. I entered a large chamber. It was like going back in time 100 years. Fine linens and handmade quilts were on the bed. Crystal vases and hand-blown glasses were on the tables. Books, candles, and various knickknacks were on the shelves. It looked lived in. The windows were closed and no dust was visible. In the hall I passed a library filled with books, then entered a magnificent master bedroom. In the back of the walk-in wardrobe was a large painting of a matronly woman, staring boldly back at me, which made me shudder momentarily. The painting disguised the doorway. Behind it was a spiral staircase leading to the second floor, where there were 2 small bedrooms and a child's playroom. The playroom contained a miniature table and set of chairs with a miniature tea set on the table. Dolls and stuffed animals were spread neatly around the room. The temperature dropped drastically as I entered. It was 15 Celsius in the rest of the house, but this room was near freezing. I backed into the hall and it was as cold as a storage locker. Instantly, I felt desperately sad, almost suicidal. Something awful must have happened in that room, I thought. The only prior experience that I could compare this to was when I used to visit my friend Lee in Los Angeles back in the mid-60s. Lee had an easy chair that faced a bay window with a panoramic view of the city. Whenever I sat in the easy chair and began to relax, I would feel the sensation of a knife slashing my throat. There was no pain, but I felt warm blood running down my neck and cool air hitting the open wound. I nicknamed it the uneasy chair. I was the only person who felt these weird sensations. Lee and his friends were amused by my reaction. After repeatedly experiencing this for several months, I began insisting that Lee ask his landlord about the history of the apartment. At first he refused asking, saying that I was being silly, but he finally agreed to ask the next time he paid the rent. On the first of the month, Lee called me. He had asked his landlord if a violent death had ever occurred in the apartment. He intentionally did not specify the type of death. The landlord replied that 3 years earlier a tenant had cut his wife's throat, killing her while she was sitting in the easy chair. Now, as I stood in the cold playroom, I wondered if the chalet too held the secret of a violent act that had taken place in the past. My opinion was that Lee's apartment in Los Angeles never had a ghost. I believed instead that it held a print of the murder. Helene and I decided to live in the chalet for a while, but I chose not to say anything about the playroom. In the following days I had times of discomfort, sometimes when I was in my workroom making sculpted candles that I sold in Paris and Fontainebleau. I had the feeling someone was standing behind me and watching me work, which made it difficult to concentrate. On one occasion, when Helene and the children were out, I was sitting in our bedroom reading. Inexplicably, I began to feel like committing suicide. Negative thoughts filled my brain, making me feel that life was not worth the effort. I put down the book and walked outside. It was a nice sunny day. My depression vanished and I felt good. I walked back inside and again felt terrible. I repeated this several times, marveling at my sudden mood changes. Without being especially conscious about it, both Helene and I must have had misgivings about the chalet, because we spent a lot of time away. We went to Paris 1 or 2 days at a time, cruised the local countryside, or went out with Madeleine and Ben. One day, 3 weeks after we had moved in, Helene said, "I suppose you know about the ghost?" "What ghost?" I replied. "Don't lie to me, Bill Russell. I know you better than that. You've been up in that toy room more than once." "Oh, that ghost," I chuckled. "Yes, that ghost." She didn't chuckle. "I've been up there more than once, and I'll never go up there again." We compared notes about the coldness, sadness, and whatever else we could think of. I told her I didn't exactly believe that there was a ghost. I likened the playroom to Lee's apartment in Los Angeles, but then concealed that it wasn't the same. Helene had no firm opinion, but knew that something wasn't quite right. Several days later, I was making a candle and decided to add an old rusty railroad spike to the motif. There were some rusty spikes on the 3rd floor in the room past the playroom. Ben had given me permission to use them in my candles. Ascending the spiral staircase, I played a little mind game with myself. If I sneak up into the playroom and peek in, I'll see what's in there, I thought. I quietly approached the open doorway and stood motionless for a moment, then quickly stuck my face into the entrance. At that very instant the door slammed shut, barely missing my nose. I was so shocked that it took me several seconds to regain my composure. Suddenly, my mind was filled with the vision of a wretchedly sad little girl who had slammed the door because she didn't want me to see her crying. I could see her clearly. She was 9 years old. Her soft brown eyes contrasted with long blonde ringlets that fell gently over her frail shoulders. She wore black, high-button shoes, a long grey dress, and a brown jumper. I opened the door slowly and entered. In one corner a small area was noticeably colder than the rest of the room. I stuck my hand, then my head into the coldness and felt deep psychological pain and crippling anguish. In the following days the coldness began to frequent other parts of the house. I called it the little girl just to give it form. I thought that perhaps my mind had created her simply as a way of making sense of this strange phenomenon. But Helene also visualized a little girl. Her description was the same as mine, from the blonde ringlets to the high button shoes. One afternoon, I was browsing on the first floor library. I pushed aside some books on top of a desk, accidentally revealing a painting on the wall that had been hidden by the books. It was the portrait of a little girl. She had brown eyes, golden hair, a long grey dress, black high button shoes, and a brown jumper. I was stunned. It was undoubtedly her. My wife and I began comparing notes to see if our perceptions of the entity matched. For example, one evening I had just finished tucking in the children and was lighting a fire. "What just happened?" Helene asked. "She just came in," I replied. "Where is she?" "At the foot of the bed." "That's right," Helene said. There was no doubt when the child was paying us a visit or what part of the room she was in, because her presence was that strong. One would have had to be insensitive not to notice. Her favorite haunts were our bedroom in the evening and my workroom when I was making candles. She would stand directly behind me and look over my left shoulder. Her nearness was not especially scary to me, just bothersome. The coldness and the despair were hard to take in large doses. Since only 2 bedrooms were available for our 3 kids, the 2 girls switched every so often. Peter, our 3-year-old, stayed in the largest bedroom with either Susie or Julie. One night, Julie was sleeping alone in the small bedroom. She woke up around 11 p.m. and began to panic. "Mom, there's somebody in here," she said in genuine terror. "It's okay, sweetheart. There's nobody in there," Helene lied reassuringly. "Damn it, she's in there with Julie," I whispered. I got out of the bed to get Julie. She was so scared that the only thing to do was to bring her to bed with us. "There, over there," she cried as I picked her up. She was pointing to a 3-stair landing in the corner. Behind the landing was a sealed-off doorway. Behind the doorway was a stairway leading up to the playroom. The entrance to the playroom was also sealed off. At that moment it dawned on me that this has been the little girl's bedroom, and that Julie was sleeping in her bed. After that night, Susie slept in that bedroom because Julie refused to sleep there again. Susie never encountered any problems there. One day, I took a load of candles to Paris and ended up spending the night there. I returned the next day to find Helene looking haggard. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. She got into bed with me and stayed there. I finally got up and sat in a chair all night," she told me. In mid-December, the little girl and the severe winter weather took their toll. We decided to head south to Morocco. 3 days before leaving, while I was watching the sunset, a full moon began to rise. I could feel its energy. It struck me that maybe I could help the little girl. Perhaps she didn't know she was dead. After all, she sought the warmth of the evening fires and the company of a mother and father. And her intense sadness seemed like the unbearable loneliness of one who had been suddenly cut out of the picture with nowhere to go and nobody to turn to. I was unfamiliar with the concept of house clearing and ghost chasing, but I memorized a monologue in French telling the child that she was dead, and that if she realized this, she would now know what to do. I would tell her our names, our relationship to Madeline, Charlotte, and Ben, the present date, that her parents were long dead, and other things that I thought might be helpful. At 9 p.m. I grabbed 2 candles and went to the door. "What are you doing?" Helene inquired sharply. She sensed that something was up. "I'm going to get rid of the little girl." "You're doing what?" "I think I know how to do it." I explained my feelings about the situation, and that I believed I could do something about it. Helene felt the same, but she had misgivings about me going upstairs because it was so spooky. The hair on my neck stood up as I ascended the spiral staircase. I entered the playroom and sat on the floor. I placed 1 candle on my left and 1 on the right and waited. Within a minute, she was in front of me. I could feel her. The moon was shining through the window, giving the room an eerie atmosphere. I took a moment to collect myself, then began my monologue, repeating everything at least 3 times. I felt that I had the child's attention and had communicated with her. An hour later, Helene and I were getting ready for bed. The children were tucked in and I made a fire. "Damn," I sighed in resignation. "I know, just to the right of the fireplace," Helene replied. "Oh well," I tried. For the next 3 days we endured her presence. On the morning of our departure, Ben was helping us load up the VW van that we had purchased in Namur. How did you guys like living in the chalet? It was nice, Ben, but it's haunted, you know. I followed up my comment with a laugh, so as to not seem too serious. I was fishing. Everybody thinks that place is haunted. His answer was very offhand, he didn't bite. After loading the van, we walked next door to say goodbye to the ladies. How did they like the chalet? Madeline asked Ben, as they were standing off to the side. Bill said it's haunted. Madeline's response was interesting. First she glanced into the next room to see if Charlotte could overhear. She couldn't. Then she turned to me. I'll tell you one thing, nobody has ever died in that house. There was emphasis on the in, as to say that someone had died but outside of the house. Her tone and the way she looked at me communicated that I had better drop the subject. I did. We said goodbye and drove off. Dominique, Madeline's daughter from a previous marriage, lived in Cadiz. We stopped in for a quick visit before taking the ferry across to Morocco. One of the first things that Dominique asked us was how we liked living in the chalet. It was nice, but it's haunted, you know. Oh, everyone thinks that place is haunted. What kind of ghost do you think is there? An old man, perhaps? It's not an old man. It's a 9-year-old girl with long blonde hair and big brown eyes. Dominique's eyes widened as her mouth dropped. She backed up several paces. Who told you about her? Was it my mom? No, your mom didn't want to talk about it. Do you want to? I would really appreciate it if you could tell us the story. Dominique first made us promise not to tell anyone in La Chante, especially Charlotte. Then she told us her story. Back in the mid-50s, we went to the US for a while. We stayed in Boston. I was 14. I had known some girls who were at my age. They had met a psychic who told them things about themselves. These things were true, but they were things that she could not possibly have known about. She gave the person the choice of being told about the past, present, or future. The girls always chose the past because it's verifiable. They thought this woman must have had some way of knowing about their private lives, but they couldn't figure out how, so they asked me to accompany them to the house, because she would have no way of knowing about me. Besides, I spoke English with an American accent, so she would probably think that I was from the States. We went to her house one evening. The girls gave me the $5 fee and waited on the veranda. The lady began the session by going into trance. She visualized her mind going across the Atlantic, then described the Normandy coast. Then she started describing the more notable landmarks of La Chante, such as the old church and some of the more dominant structures. Finally, she began to describe the house. She mentioned the old stairway railing that broke when I was 10, causing me to fall. She said that was how I got the scar on my knee, which is true. Then she unexpectedly drifted over to the chalet. As she was describing the toy room, she suddenly screamed at the top of her lungs. I fell over backward in my chair. I quickly got up, scared to death. I grabbed her shoulders and shook her, trying to snap her out of it. She opened her eyes. Why did you scream? I asked. That sad little girl. She's so sad, and she's still there. What little girl? What are you saying? She's in the yard chasing a ball, falling. Can't breathe, can't breathe. I stuffed the $5 in her hand and got out of there. When I got home later, I told my mom what had happened and asked her if she knew anything about the little girl. She told me she was the only living person that knew the story. She made me promise to keep it a secret because it was a shameful crime of negligence that concerned our own ancestors. The girl's name was Michelle. The date was around 1890. She was playing in the yard outside the chalet, unsupervised by an adult. The well was to be repaired and was uncovered, exposing a hole that was more than 70 meters deep. Needless to say, she fell into it and died. The body was never fished out, and the well was filled in with dirt. There was never a funeral because the death was kept secret. The family fabricated a story about Michelle moving to Paris to live with relatives in order to attend a private school. About 6 months later, they said that she had died from some kind of illness. You must understand that not only would her parents have been prosecuted by the authorities, but our family would have had to live with the stigma of the tragedy even to this day, because our neighbors in La Chante are the descendants of the neighbors in Michelle's time. Not even Ben knows the story. I was moved by Dominic's account of the little girl, Michelle, and the overall implications of what this haunting meant. In addition to dying suddenly, Michelle had received no burial services. Perhaps one reason we have funerals is to let the deceased know that he or she is dead. Another factor is that the unavoidable guilt that Michelle's parents must have had to deal with could have had something to do with keeping her earthbound, because they could not psychologically let her go as long as the guilt was unresolved. It may be that a more enlightened approach to the funeral ritual would be beneficial, not only to assist the disembodied soul to leave, but also to encourage the loved ones who are present to voluntarily let go. This may have an effect on the deceased person's departure. In May, we decided we had better go back to France and make preparations to return to the US, since our cash was running low. Looks like we'll have to endure Michelle for a few days, Helene whispered. After unloading the van, I could not resist the urge to go upstairs to the playroom. The first thing I noticed was that the room was not cold. I sat on the floor and looked out the window. Flowers were budding and birds were singing. After a few minutes I became aware that I was totally comfortable and relaxed. This was a first for me in the playroom. I wondered if Michelle was gone. The next day Helene said that she did not feel Michelle's presence. I agreed. The atmosphere of the chalet was entirely different. Helene had never seen Michelle's portrait, so I decided to run up to the library and bring it down so that she could see it. I went right to where the picture should have been, but nothing was on the wall except a faint dust outline of the frame. My first thought was that Madeline had removed it, since Dominic had undoubtedly told her that we knew about the story. But that was not a possibility, because Madeline was a semi-invalid and needed assistance to ascend a stairway. The possibility remained that she could have asked Ben to remove it. Ben did not know about Michelle, however. He was also a very guileless man who could not easily lie, so I believed that if I were to ask him about the portrait, and he lied or tried to avoid the question, I would see it in his demeanor. That afternoon Ben and I were planting some bulbs in the yard. Say, Ben, I wanted to show Helene a picture that was hanging in the library, but it's not there. Maybe you looked in the wrong place, he replied. I had looked in the right place though, and Ben was definitely not lying. I began to believe that Michelle had somehow managed to get rid of the portrait as a way of letting us know she was gone. At around 9 p.m. Julie said to Helene, "Mom, the monster is gone." When I heard Julie's comment, I thought of the times from September to December when the kids would play monster. One would be a monster and would chase the other two. At that moment it struck me that they had never seen a monster film. "What monster, Julie?" I asked. "You know, the one that lived upstairs. Did you ever see the monster, honey?" "Yes, that night in the bedroom." "What was the monster, Julie?" "It was a woman, not a big woman like Mom, but bigger than Susie." "What did she look like, sweetheart?" "She looked like Alice." At this point Susie and Peter stuck their heads in the doorway to listen. It suddenly became clear to me that all three of the kids knew at least something about Michelle. "Well," we laughed, "there's really no such things as monsters. Now get ready for bed, kids." 12 years later, when Julie was 16, I asked her if she remembered the incident in the bedroom of the chalet. She replied to me, "Of course, I was in bed wide awake, looking toward the 3-step landing. All of a sudden, the blonde girl walked through the sealed-off doorway and stood there, glaring at me, as if to say, 'What are you doing in my bed?' That was when I realized the room had been hers, so I could never sleep in that room again." Okay, let's continue on with something a bit shorter. It's called The Voice Outside. I don't talk about this night anymore, not because I'm scared of people calling me crazy. I honestly don't care about that, but because something about remembering it feels like calling it back. I grew up in a rural area where night didn't feel empty, it felt crowded, like the darkness itself was watching. Our house sat on an edge of a field that sloped down into a patch of woods. Even in daylight, the tree line always looked too still, like something was standing just inside, waiting for the sun to go down so it could move. That night, it was raining so hard the gutters overflowed and the whole property smelled like wet soil and metal. My mom was on a night shift, so it was just me and my sister. Around 11, I paused my game and slid off my headphones because I heard something downstairs. Just faintly, a woman's voice. It felt calm and familiar. "Come here," it said. It sounded exactly like my mom when she's annoyed but trying to stay patient. Not yelling, just that clipped tone she used when she expected me to help with groceries. I stepped into the hallway, expecting to see the light downstairs, but the whole place was dark except for the dim lamp at the end of the hall. My sister's room was silent. I leaned over the railing and listened. "Come outside," it said. It was the same voice and same tone, but clearer this time, like she was standing on the porch under the roof where the rain didn't hit as hard. My stomach dropped. She wasn't home. She couldn't be home. I walked downstairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the bottom, I felt like I was being watched, not from the windows or the doors, from inside the house itself, like the walls were paying attention. I went to the front door and pressed my ear against it. There was nothing. Then, right behind the door, the voice whispered, "Open it." Except now it wasn't my mom's voice. It was lower, thicker, like someone pushing air through their throat. I staggered back so hard I knocked into the shoe cabinet. Upstairs, my sister's door was slammed open. She whispered, terrified, "Mom just texted me. She's still at work. Who are you talking to?" Before I could answer, something from the yard let out a long, slow breath, not human, not animal, wet and rattling, like lungs filled with mud. Then I heard some footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, but it felt wrong. Each step squished deep into the soaked grass, but there was a second noise with them, a faint clicking, like joints snapping back into place every time it moved. The house went dead silent. Even the storm seemed to pull back. Then suddenly fingers, or something sounding like fingers, tapped on the glass. Not 3 taps this time, just one, long and slow, scraping across the pane. I grabbed my sister's arm and pulled her into the hallway. We sat on the floor and listened as whatever it was started circling the house. Every few steps, it would stop and mimic our mom's voice again. "Come outside, help me, I need you." But each time the voice got worse, more distorted, like it was learning how to speak by imitating us and getting the shape wrong. At one point it tried to say my sister's name, but it dragged every syllable out too long and ended up with a breathy clicking sound, like teeth clapping together. Then it stopped walking and it became silent. Then, from directly under the living room window, inches from where we were hiding inside, came a sound that turned my whole body cold. It started repeating the last thing that I said out loud earlier that night. My own voice, it was perfectly copied, except deeper. "Mom, Mom, Mom," over and over, like it was trying to summon her, as if it wanted her to come outside too. We didn't move a muscle until headlights swept across the living room wall. My mom's car, the moment the tires crunched the gravel, the thing outside moved, fast, way too fast. It tore across the yard, making the horrible joint clicking sound, and then the wood swallowed it. We ran out to meet her before she even got out of the car. She didn't believe us, not really, but she went out the next morning to prove that the noise was probably just an animal. When she didn't come back for a minute, we followed. She was standing at the edge of the field, staring at the wet dirt. There were footprints in the mud. They were long and deep, and shaped almost like human feet, but stretched, like something heavier had tried to balance on toes that weren't meant to hold it up. And besides them, dragging along the ground in long arcs, were marks like fingertips, 5 of them, but each one nearly the length of a hand. We moved out the year after. The new owners cut down the trees behind the house, but sometimes, on stormy nights, people still say they hear a woman's voice calling from the tree line, asking someone to come outside, pleading someone to open the door, and sometimes, if the rain is heavy enough, a second voice answers. Our next story is called A Haunted House in Tokyo. During the air attack on Tokyo, even the bombers seemed to avoid the place. Fire swept around it, devastating nearby areas, but they left the house to a slower decay. The house is of wood, built at the beginning of World War I, The builder disappeared from the job before the house was completed. For a time it stood unfinished, and later the owner had another contractor finish its construction. A German, one of the many who lived in Tokyo at the beginning of World War I, occupied the house for a time and hanged himself for unknown reasons. This gave the house an unsavory name, and it stood empty for a little time. Then a Japanese rented the house. In 1922 he hanged himself in the same room where the German had died. The Japanese are not superstitious people, but 2 suicides in the same room in the same house did not make number 164 more desirable. Housing became more and more difficult to obtain in Tokyo following World War II, with much of the city bombed and burned out, but still no one seemed interested in the vacant house. According to the Tokyo Shimbun, it was run down and was finally offered rent-free to anybody who would occupy it. In August 1952, Fujisaburo Takata, aged 32, an artist in desperate need of shelter, moved into the lonely, weather-worn house, empty since 1922. Mr. Takata knew the tradition of the house, but moved in anyways. According to the story by Fred Saito of the Associated Press, Tokyo, Takata did not find his new resident peaceful. Going to bed, he set his alarm clock for 7 a.m., but was awakened at 2:40 a.m. when it went off spontaneously at the wrong hour. He reset the clock, and again it rang at the wrong hour. He took the clock to a repairman, who told him there was nothing wrong with it. Mr. Takata bought himself a new alarm clock anyways, but both clocks continued to go off at the wrong time in the morning. The repairman suggested that some other factor might account for their behavior. The books in the bookcase began to move about, and books that he left closed on the table in the evening lay open in the next morning. The doors of the house were flimsy and rickety. Mr. Takata repaired them and fixed the locks, but if he locked them at night, they were open when he awoke. The Tokyo Shimbun, Japan's largest evening paper, heard of Mr. Takata's trouble and ran a short story about the crazy clocks in the crazy house in their issue of August 31st, 1952. This newspaper story brought new trouble for Mr. Takata. From then on, he received an average of 20 visitors a day. He had to stop his work to answer the barrage of questions from intruders who stopped at his house day and night to inquire about the ghosts. Some of them asked to stay overnight to watch the ghosts, while other visitors asked to share the rooms. Fred Saito, who checked the original account which appeared in the Shimbun, states that Mr. Takata is very shy and dislikes visitors. Mr. Takata protested to him. "I do not mind crazy alarm clocks, nor the ghost. I do not mind the noises, the moving books, and the doors that unlock themselves for no reason at all. However, I do mind these curious people. I can't get any work done with this constant interruption, and if they keep on pestering me, I shall certainly have a nervous breakdown. My nerves are getting bad already." That was very short, but I thought it was interesting. It read more like a newspaper article or something. And for our ending story, we have The Phantom Battle. Edge Hill is a place which lies almost exactly on the border of the 2 counties of Warwickshire and Northamptonshire. Here, in the year 1642, one of the battles of the English Civil War between King Charles I and the Parliamentary Army took place. Years before, King John had fought a battle there, with his barons too, before he signed the Magna Carta. What happened after the Battle of Edge Hill was so amazing and unbelievable that Charles I ordered an inquiry just a few months later. The officers who investigated didn't believe what they had been told either, until they found themselves seeing it and hearing it for themselves. And what's more, although it has faded with time, it is still sometimes seen and heard today. The battle took place on Sunday, 23rd of October, 1642. Although afterwards both sides claimed a victory, the truth was that the king's army had lost. This was largely because of Prince Rupert of the Rhine, King Charles's nephew. He was a brilliant cavalry leader, but unfortunately for the king, once he had led a cavalry charge, he never knew what to do next, and he had no idea of swinging the horse around and rejoining the battle. He was in fact rather hot-headed and impetuous. On this occasion, he led a cavalry charge, which as usual was completely successful. Then his troops on horseback found that they had charged right through the supplies of the parliamentary army, and they spent time plundering instead of going back to rejoin the fighting. By the time they did return, the king's troops were withdrawing from the battlefield, and the king himself retreated to Oxford. 2 months later, it was Christmas week. On Christmas Eve, some shepherds, farm laborers, and a few late travelers were around just after midnight when they were scared by the sound of a battle going on near them. Then they saw the battle, infantry, cavalry, the jangle of harness, charging and neighing horses, powder smoke from the guns. They heard the musket fire, the cannon fire, the cries of men, even the trumpets giving orders. They even saw the flames coming from the muskets and cannons as they were fired. The noise was so loud that the birds were woken up and flew off, and cattle stampeded. And it lasted not just for a short time, but for several hours, until about 3 o'clock the next morning. On that Christmas night, many people from the surrounding villages went out to watch, in hopes of seeing the battle again, and were not disappointed. It was all happening again, and it repeated itself the following Saturday and Sunday nights as well, and again the weekend after that. When the astonishing news reached Charles I in Oxford, he ordered an immediate inquiry. He sent a commission of officers back to Edge Hill to investigate these totally unbelievable reports. Their findings were printed at the King's command on 23rd of January 1643. The ones whom he had sent were Colonel Lewis Kirk, Captain Dudley, Captain Wayman, and 3 members of his court. The members of the commission expected to find the whole affair a fake until they started taking evidence from some of the local people. They were a little skeptical still when they heard the same story from the local church minister, the Reverend Samuel Marshall, and the local magistrate, William Wood. Both of these said that they had seen the phantom battle for themselves. But what finally convinced them was when the battle started again, with them present. They recognized some of the apparitions, even including Sir Edmund Verney, the king's standard bearer, who had been killed in the fighting. His hand had been cut off, still holding the standard. They found that they could watch the entire progress of the battle, which, while they had been taken apart themselves, they had not of course been able to see so clearly. At the beginning they reported the king's army seemed to have the best, but after 2 hours the king's colours withdrew and rather appeared to fly. As astonishing as this was, they had both seen and heard it, including all the disbelieving members of the commission which Charles had sent to investigate. It has been seen since. When it happens, it is always on the anniversary of the battle now, but there is no doubt that it has faded with time, as if the effect is wearing away. One woman, in recent time, was so astonished at what happened at the battlefield that she gave a detailed account on BBC radio of her strange experience. She had been driving in her car along the road on the way to visit some friends, when she suddenly heard strange sounds going on all around her, happy sounds, cheerful voices, and some shouting. It sounded, she said, almost as if some kind of party was going on invisibly outside the car. Then, to her astonishment and fright, a man's laughing head appeared without warning part way between the car's windshield and the end of the car bonnet. Then it faded. Going back home the next day, at the same spot she could hear the time groans and cries around her, as if people were in agony, but this time she saw nothing, just heard the noises. Only afterwards did she find that she had been driving without realizing it along the road which runs near the edge of the battlefield, on the eve and then the day of the anniversary of the Battle of Edge Hill. What she had encountered were ghosts of the troops, all happy and cheerful on the anniversary of the day before the battle had taken place. Then coming back the following day at the end of the battle was being repeated, with the wounded and dying all around and the bloodshed over. This is the only authentic ghostly battle to take place, as far as is known, anywhere in the world, and there is no doubt that the battle has repeated itself in ghostly form several times since, and that it is absolutely genuine. But it wasn't the only ghostly appearance in the English Civil War. Charles I himself saw a ghost, only at first he thought it was just a nightmare which he was having, but the second time he was quite convinced. On 12th of May 1641, Charles had signed the death warrant of Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Stafford. He had no real choice in the matter. The war had not yet begun. The mob were outside St. James's Palace, Whitehall in London, and if he hadn't signed the warrant, his own life, the lives of his family, and the stability of the kingdom would have been at great risk. So reluctantly he signed the warrant for the Earl of Stafford's death, and 100,000 people watched Stafford's execution in glee. The fact was that the Earl of Stafford did not deserve to be put to death. At one time his job had been Lord President of the North, and in the north of England he had stamped out slave labour in the wooden mills, championed their apprentices, and had come down with very heavily on any arrogant landowners and greedy lawyers. After that, when he became Lord Deputy of Ireland, he did the same thing. He was sometimes harsh with his equals, but invariably was considerate with humbler people. He hated double dealers and those who used the king's court simply to make fortunes for themselves. What he wanted was a sensible monarchy working with the parliament, which was free to represent the people. In fact, at one time he had gone to prison. He had refused to pay a special tax which the king had imposed in 1626, because he considered that the king had no right to impose a tax without Parliament's approval first. So what with one thing and another, he made many enemies both at the court and in Parliament, and that was what really led to his death. However, 4 years later, Charles I was staying at a house in Daventry, Northamptonshire. It's still there and is now the Wheat Heaths Inn. 2 hours after the king had gone to bed, his guards heard an argument going on in the bedroom and distinctly heard two separate voices, one the king's and one belonging to someone else. The guards burst into the room in case the king was being attacked, but Charles said that he had dreamed that Stafford had been there and had told him not to fight the parliamentary army anymore, for he would never defeat them. The next morning the king called a council and told the members what he had dreamed. Then he announced that there would be no more war, and instead they would move north. Prince Rupert were a member of the council, and said that they should not be put off just because the king had a bad dream. That same night Stafford appeared again, in armour, with a thin line of blood across his neck where the executioner's axe has cut through it. He warned Charles again not to fight, and said that the king's army would be defeated if he did, and that it would end in Charles' own execution. It was, the ghost said, the last advice that he was permitted to give him. So, the next morning, Charles called another council, and reported what had happened at his second appearance. He was now convinced that it was no dream. My Lord Stafford was here, he announced, as the record of the council meeting shows. Again, Prince Rupert was scornful. Unlike the other officers, of course, the prince was a member of the king's family and could speak exactly as he wished. So, on the 14th of June, 1645, the Battle of Naseby took place. The king's army was defeated, and the civil war was virtually at an end. I wish to God I had paid heed to the warnings, Charles often said afterwards, while he was waiting for his own execution. Those who had been with him during those 2 nights in Daventry at least knew exactly what he meant. Well, that's the end of the stories for tonight. I hope you enjoyed and it helped you relax or fall asleep. And as always, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.